the June peer-to-peer network get together and discussion. I mentioned, those of you who might have just come on, if you check the attendee box within the GoTo dashboard, you're muted now, or you're either self-muted or we've muted you. But if you want to, during the presentation, if you want to ask Nick a question, raise your hand in the box and I will keep an eye on it, and then I'll interrupt Nick and then and ask him to answer your question, and I'll unmute you. And ideally, most of the questions will be held until the end. In addition, there's a chat box that you'll see also within the dashboard. If you want to put a question or something in there, and that'd be fine. I'll be monitoring that as well. And then after this is done, the presentation, there'll be Q&A, and then there'll be a sort of a quick peer-to-peer discussion about next year. The fiscal year for Connecticut ends at the end of this month. And good news is the peer-to-peer is going to continue next year, next fiscal. We have something scheduled for July, and we can talk a little bit more about where we're going to all be heading with the peer-to-peer come the end of this year and halfway through 2022. So with that, I'm going to introduce Nick Jones, who's going to be talking about a subject near and dear to, I think, most of the hearts of the people in the P2P, leveraging efficiency program resources to advance Passive House in the state. And Nick's been instrumental in getting that underway, both from an incentive perspective and an educational perspective. And we've been tracking with him a lot about this. And it's going to be great to get a presentation. Many of you know Nick. He's the residential new construction EE lead for Eversource Energy. He's been working with builders, developers, and design teams, industry associations, and state and fed organizations to advance high performance building practices and technology. And he's been a moderator at several programs and presentations for ACEEE, DOE, Connecticut Green Building Council, Passive House Alliance, and many others. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick and enjoy the presentation. Like I said, if you have a burning question that can't wait, Nick will answer it, but you need to raise your hand and I'll unmute you. And hopefully, and then we'll have a bigger discussion at the end. So thanks, everybody. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Dean. And big thanks to Dean and Rudy and Alicia for bringing this presentation to life. A couple of months ago, we were discussing this, and we figured it was important to bring up this topic again because we did roll out some new resources this year for Passive House, both in terms of training and design and incentives. So I did want to go through all of that with this group because the peer-to-peer group's been really instrumental in providing recommendations on how to continue to push the momentum for Passive House across the region. But like Dean said, I want to make this interactive. And so if you have questions throughout the process, feel free to put them in the chat, raise your hand. I have no trouble with answering a question mid-presentation. So with that, I'm going to kick this off with just a little bit about Eversource and who we are. I know most of you are familiar with Eversource. We are a 3-state organization across Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, servicing electric, natural gas, and now water customers in parts of Connecticut. We have about 4 million customers, about 8,300 employees across all 3 of our states. And I think the big takeaway from here is that we've been recognized as the ‑1 energy efficiency provider in the nation. Energy efficiency is a really vital part of what we do, and it's incredibly important to our bottom line as a utility. So much so that we invest about $700 million annually in energy efficiency across the 3 states, and it's divided up between residential, commercial, municipal programs. And in Connecticut, Energize Connecticut is sort of that brand name that lumps all of those different entities under one umbrella, from both Eversource, the utilities, Eversource, CNG, SCG, as well as the Energy Efficiency Board, Connecticut Green Bank, and DEEP. We try to lump all of our different initiatives under one umbrella, that Energize Connecticut umbrella. But for today, what I'm going to be talking about is Passive House and how, at least in Connecticut, the utilities are sort of putting forth different training and incentive opportunities designed to continue to build momentum for Passive House, and also give you kind of an overview of a look towards the future, where I'll talk a little bit about AllElectric buildings and some of the really creative things that I've seen project teams doing across the state, and what that's going to look like for the next at least 3 years. So I'm sure all of us have read some of these articles, but there's been like I said, there's been a ton of momentum building for Passive House. So much, in fact, that groups like Realtor and Forbes have put forth articles in the last couple of years to try to really get the industry to understand what Passive House is, as well as what that entails, and so much so that ASHRAE is now in the sort of mid to final stages of developing a passive building standard equivalent for commercial buildings. So I'm really looking forward to that standard rolling out, and for anyone that's on that board or on that committee for ASHRAE, I would love to hear your thoughts about what that standard is going to look like. Now, admittedly, this slide is a little bit old. This is probably the most updated information I can get from FIAS. I did actually ask FIAS for an update on some of these numbers, and if I am able to get an update on these numbers, I will definitely redesign this chart a little bit before sending the slide deck out. And if anyone knows where I can find more updated numbers, I'd be happy to include that in there. But this is just to kind of show there's been a lot of momentum in terms of not only momentum, but also design teams that are pursuing and constructing these Passive House buildings. And if we look towards 2020 and 2021, I'm sure this graph would sort of continue this exponential increase, because particularly in the Northeast and out West, we're seeing a ton of these buildings being developed and designed and constructed. But also, with that, we're seeing an increase in Passive House professionals, and I'm going to get into that in a couple of slides as well. But in terms of Passive House credentials and Passive House professionals, we're seeing a lot more individuals, even project teams, that are pursuing Passive House credentials within their own organizations. Groups like Haynes Construction and Kenneth Borson Architects. I know there's individuals within those organizations in-house that actually have their Passive House certification or credentials, and that's really promising to see. And I'm sure most of you have seen this graph before. I believe this graph came from Sam Rashkin and DOE, but in any case, this is just kind of an overview of some of the different certification offerings that are out there. And again, I'll talk a little bit about those certification offerings in the next couple of slides. But I think this does a really good job of just kind of summarizing the differences between those different certification offerings. They're sort of layered onto each other. And if there was a slide for Living Future Challenge, that'd probably be right about where FIAS Plus Source Zero is. But in any case, I think it just does a really, really good visual job of showing, how to pursue these different certifications and how these certifications sort of layer onto each other. This is really important, and a lot of credit has to be given to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, but also to CHAFA. Because what we're trying to do with both our training offerings as well as our incentive offerings for Passive House is we're trying to really align our efficiency program objectives with some of the state policy goals. And so, from the top down, the state has the comprehensive energy strategy. And as part of that, there's so many pieces to that are focused on high performance building design. Things like strategic electrification. And so what we're trying to do with these Passive House training and incentive opportunities is we're trying to sort of align our visions so that we have sort of a unified approach across not only DEEP and Energize Connecticut, but also the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and CHAFA in their qualified allocation plan. So a lot of the folks on this call, a lot of the attendees on this call, were really instrumental in helping to develop that QAP for CHAFA. And I think, with these three different dimensions, we've really become a leading state in terms of designing and developing and constructing really high performance new construction buildings that are not only extremely efficient and extremely sustainable, but also really get at the heart of energy affordability and equity in housing. So some of the objectives and some of the things that we're trying to do with both the training offering as well as the incentive opportunities is we're trying to lead change through these different offerings, while also leveraging our trade ally networks, groups like HBRA and AIA Connecticut and Connecticut Green Building Council and Connecticut Passive House Alliance, who have been extremely instrumental in bringing this to life. Particularly, big shout out to Connecticut Passive House for the huge lift that they've given us in helping to push this initiative forward. But we're also trying to support workforce development. That's going to be a huge piece in the next 3 years. How can we get more individuals trained and certified with Passive House credentials so that they can be in the field and working on some of these projects? And in doing that, we're in the preliminary stages now of creating really innovative incentive offerings. So a lot of what we're doing in Connecticut now sort of mirrors and aligns with what Mass Save is doing, and we're trying to bring these same offerings to New Hampshire. And really the goal there is to not only make this a statewide initiative or a statewide objective, but to bring this to a regional scale. That's sort of our vision for phase 2 is how can we bring these different, sort of isolated and siloed statewide initiatives to a regional scale, where it'll, benefit the entire New England region. And also, obviously, the last piece is just establishing training opportunities for both, those that are just starting to get into this field, as well as those that have been in this field a while, that are, trying to really learn something new. And we're doing that with two different things. And I know I've mentioned this already, but we have different training opportunities that we've been doing for just about the last year now. I believe we kicked it off last year. And then earlier this year, different incentive opportunities that we have. So I'm going to get into the training opportunities and the training offerings really quickly and go through these, because I know a lot of you have probably been on some of these trainings. But really the way that we designed our training, going back a couple of years, we thought about how we wanted to deliver sort of an innovative package of different offerings through this Passive House training initiative. And we realized that there's really three main types of training. You have sort of the lunch and learn variety, which are a little bit more ad hoc, right? So those are things like Passive House 101, Passive House 201. We're looking at one that's designed around embodied carbon. And really what those are sort of beginner modules, if you will. And I'll say beginner to intermediate modules, because they touch on very high level topics, but they also sort of get a little bit into the weeds, but not so much that they require a full day of training. So we do have training partners, and I should mention that ICF and Connecticut Passive House are our training partners across all three of these different training offerings. But we also have we have a different seminar style training. We did a 4-part building science workshop with Stephen Winter Associates, and I'll talk a little bit about that and sort of what that entails, what that did entail, and sort of what that's going to look like for the future. And finally, there's a certification reimbursement, which I will touch on a little bit. So for those that are looking to get FIAS or PHI credentials, we are offering a credential reimbursement through FIAS and PHI. So again, I touched on this already, but those lunch and learn style trainings, really the format is very, I won't say high level. It is a bit more high level in a sense that, they're only an hour or two long, but they're high level overviews of building science topics related to passive house design and construction. And so, we've done, I think we've done 4 or 5 of those trainings now. They are a bit, like I said, they're a bit more ad hoc in a sense that, we can offer those really at any time. We're also, sort of looking at the opportunity to offer sort of on-demand lunch and learn style trainings. And that's something that I'm looking at for 2020 as, as we start to as we continue to ramp up these training offerings. Our target audience for these trainings is really anyone in the building community, architects, builders, designers. We've had municipal officials, we've had engineers, we've had building officials. There's been folks from the state that have attended these trainings, and they've been really, well received. I think, on when we first rolled this out, our first Passive House 101 training, we had something like 250 people on that first training, which, was incredible. And then we had, our first building science workshop style training. These are more of a half-day format, and there were 4 distinct trainings that we offered. Really what we tried to do is we tried to develop them and base them around the different industries or the different groups that'll be working on these projects. So we had one that was really specific to HVAC and plumbing subcontractors, one that touched on sort of a high-level introduction to passive house, as well as some of the design considerations around a passive house envelope. We did one on QA/QC techniques, and then we did one for really all of the different subs that are going to be working on or touching that building. So carpentry, windows, envelope. There was, a number of different things that last building science workshop covered. But yeah, these seminar style trainings have been extremely well received as well. In total, we had 4 of them, so it was a 4-part series, something that we're looking to do again. And what it was we spanned it over, I believe it was a 6-week period, but we have the ability to sort of do this over a 4-week period. So, a half day to, anywhere from a half day to 6 hours out of the day to do these trainings, and we can cover them in 4 weeks. And Stephen Winter Associates was extremely instrumental in bringing this to life. They were the ones that did all these different trainings. They were the presenter on all of these. And I sat in on all of these trainings, and if you really want a full deep dive into the world of passive house design and construction, these are the trainings that you have to do. Ideally, one of the things that we'd like to do with these seminar style trainings next year is make them a little bit more hands-on. So, as things start to open up a little bit more, I'm hoping that we can do some more really hands-on seminar style trainings. And then finally, we have that Passive House Professional Accreditation Reimbursement. It's an extremely easy, we've tried to make this as easy as possible. If you find a FIAS or a PHI credential course, if you get your professional credentials, you just fill out a 1-page application, you send it back to us, and we'll write you a check for half the cost. But admittedly, this is one of the ones that we need a little bit of help on, and one of the ones I'd love to hear back from this group on, because we haven't had too many folks that have taken advantage of this reimbursement. I know one of the things that I've heard is partner up with FIAS or PHI and bring a training to Connecticut. It was a little bit tricky, obviously in the last year to do that. But as PHI and FIAS have become more virtual in their credentials, in their credential offerings, I think that's something that we can consider for next year. But definitely interested in hearing from some of the folks about how we can sort of scale this up a little bit. And just some results to date on the training for the lunch and learn style trainings. We've had 4 public trainings that we've held with about 500 attendees in those different courses, which is phenomenal to see. The building science workshop, again, like I said, we had a 4-part series, so 4 trainings held. There were 445 attendees. I think the thing that struck me on these building science workshops was there were 195 attendees that attended all 4 of those different trainings, which was absolutely incredible. You'd never think that architects or municipal officials or state officials, that they'd be interested in all 4 of those different components, but they were, they were really engaged. They asked great questions during those trainings. And then on the professional credential side, like I said, we've only had two individuals take advantage of that professional credential reimbursement so far. So anyone that is looking to get their Passive House credentials, by all means, I would encourage you to, and I can walk you through the reimbursement process. I guess, I'll stop here for a second. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand, and if not, I'll keep chugging along here.
Yeah, does anybody, I don't see any hands raised, Nick, but give everybody a second. Are you going to unpack the reimbursement a little bit more as part of the discussion, or is it reimbursement for part of the cost of the certification, the actual credential, or?
Yep, that's exactly what. So from what I've seen, Dean, the actual course for the course and the tests, typically, the one I've seen through FIAS, somebody can correct me on this, but I think it was somewhere in the range of like $2,000 to do a course to get your credentials. It was somewhere in that maybe a little less than $2,000 range. And really all we're doing there is, it's like I said, it's a 1-page application. Once you complete the FIAS or PHI's course, you just send us the application and the invoice, and we'll write you a check for half the price.
50%. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's great. And actually, I had a second one about the course topics and across the various platforms that you're talking about. How are you identifying the topics that you want to talk about? Is that something you do interactively with like SWA or ICF? Is it? I'm thinking about the peer-to-peer and how we might be able to help.
For sure.
Recommend topics to you.
Yeah, it's interesting because particularly for those lunch and learn style trainings, that was sort of feedback that we got from the industry on topics that they wanted to see. We actually did one of those lunch and learn style trainings just for CHAFA staff, and it was because their staff that was working on the QAP had questions on passive house, specific to like passive house modeling and WFI modeling. So we did an entire lunch and learn session just on that topic. So if there are topics that folks want to see covered, I would absolutely encourage you to send me an email or shoot me an email, and we'll see if we have. What we'll do is we'll work with ICF and with our different trade ally partners and with Connecticut Passive House to get a presenter to speak on those topics. So we can bring a professional to talk on any different topic that we can think about. But a lot of those lunch and learn style trainings were very much feedback that we got from the industry. The seminar style ones from Stephen Winter Associates, that was something that Stephen Winter Associates put together probably about 1.5 to 2 years ago, and it was based on their knowledge of working on these projects and sort of seeing who the different actors were in each of these projects, and who, what were the really important topics to cover. So they did an absolutely phenomenal job on those seminar style trainings. But again, if there's other topics that we can cover in either a seminar style or a lunch and learn style training, by all means, I'm all ears.
Yeah, okay, because that's, I think, one of the things that we're always wrestling with too, is the topics for sessions like this and how that might fold into or parallel or complement what you're doing. So that's something for discussion. We have gotten a couple of questions from the audience. Alicia wants to know if you, in order to get the reimbursement for the passive house certification and training, do you need to pass the training?
Yes.
I would assume, but yeah. And then she's also saying at Connecticut GBC, we're hearing interest among our emerging professionals community about all of this, so managing their expectations is helpful. Seema mentioned that you had both CHAPA and DOH staff there, and that it was great at the one that you talked about before. Oh, Susan's asking, is the reimbursement retroactive? If you took, I don't know how far back, but if you got your, I guess what she's asking, if you got your passive house certification before the incentive, can you go back and get reimbursed for it?
I would say if you got it within the last, so from the beginning of the year on, so as when we started offering it, so if it was something that you might not have heard about prior to getting your credentials, if you got your credentials anywhere from January 1st, 2021 on, I would certainly offer it retroactively. But I can't go back any further than that, just because, for forecasting and budget reasons, the intent of that credential reimbursement was rolled out in the earlier parts of this year.
Cool. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it for right now. So let's go back to the show.
Awesome. Because I think this will be a really important piece to touch on, and I think in talking to, and I have to give a big shout out to Alicia and to Seema, because I think without those two, this presentation doesn't happen, and some of these initiatives actually don't happen, and as well as some of the folks from Connecticut Green Bank as well. But I want to touch on first of all, I'm going to touch on our program structure. I think most people on this call are familiar with our program structure. We try not to make too many changes to our residential new construction program structure, and that's intentional. We've seen other efficiency programs make changes throughout the years, and it's a little bit disruptive to the industry, and so we've tried to stick with the same basic program structure for the last couple of years, and I think we're going to continue that into the next couple of years. But anyway, we have a performance-based program structure via a HERS index. We also have a whole building performance path. The whole building performance path is a little bit different, and we're actually sort of expanding that HERS path this year. So we're sort of going by ResNet's new standards. You can do any residential building that's any building that has residential units in it, you can do the HERS rating on the different dwelling units. We're up to a certain point. If 80% of the building, if 20% or more of the building is commercial space or common area or corridors, then I still kind of wanted to go through that whole building performance path to do more of an ASHRAE level audit and ASHRAE level model. But in any case, both structures are performance based. I'm going to touch a little bit on the HERS incentive structure. Again, most of you are very familiar with this structure. It differs by the different type of building. So single family, townhouses and condos, apartment units, there's different incentives for different tiers or different types of building and different tiers. So for every point below a 40 HERS index, you get a little bit of an adder based on your different dwelling type. And these tiers go all the way down to a tier zero, a zero energy home. So, you know, a single family zero energy home, I think it's something like $6,500 for an incentive. And that's just on the HERS path. It's just, you know, strictly for the HERS incentive. We do have an additional affordable housing bonus as well. So tacked on to these HERS incentives, there's a 25% adder for every unit that falls below 60% of the state median income. And there's also, you know, one of the things that is really important to understand, our funding comes from electric and natural gas ratepayers, although we are still offering an incentive for propane heated homes, but it's, you know, 50% of these incentives. So it's a little, it's less for propane heated homes, propane heated condos. Yeah, mostly because of where our funding comes from. We have bonus incentives. I won't get into like the different bonus incentives that we have for all of these different offerings. They're on the back of our application. It's anywhere from like $250 to $500 to $750 for these different certification bonuses. The exception being FIAS and Living Building Challenge, which I will touch on in the next couple of slides to go over, you know, how our incentive structure has changed because of this momentum that's been building for Passive House. In addition to the HERS incentives that I've identified, we've also developed incentives that are new for this year that are specific to Passive House projects. Right now, the incentives that we've developed for Passive House are specific to multifamily projects. There's a couple of reasons for that. You know, I think one is that, you know, if you look at permit activity in Connecticut, a lot of the permit activity has, you know, in the last couple of years has been geared around multifamily units, you know, single duplex or not duplexes, townhouses, condos, things like that. Passive House also, you know, I know most of you on this call understand this even better than I do. You know, Passive House just conceptually makes a lot of sense in multifamily. You know, you have a design that's more conducive to Passive House standard, to being able to build at Passive House standards, you know, with more of a box-like structure. There's certainly challenges there, but, you know, because you don't have, you know, as many cantilevers and bump outs with a multifamily building, you know, it is a little bit, I won't say easier, but it's, you know, the design makes it a little bit more conducive to Passive House standards. Also, you have higher internal gains with multifamily, and I think that, you know, again, adds to the benefit of these Passive House buildings. But those different offerings, you know, come in 3 different flavors: you know, design incentives, modeling incentives, and certification incentives. So the design incentives, I think this is one of the, you know, this is one of the most important pieces for us to understand. And you know, in talking to some of the folks from Mass Save, where they sort of kicked off this initiative 2 years ago, you know, I asked them, what is the most important piece to this incentive offering for you guys? And they, hands down, all of them said this was it, you know, the feasibility study. So what we're doing is, you know, we decided to sort of mirror that, and we're offering up to 100% of the cost of a feasibility study, capped at $5,000 a project. You know, and I know $5,000 isn't always going to be enough to cover it, but at least it gets it covers a portion. It gets the discussion started. And for those that are unfamiliar, you know, feasibility studies, they're a quick estimate. You know, with the different building systems, the you know, preliminary drawings and preliminary specs that project teams have at, you know, whether or not a building will meet Passive House standards, some of the things that they're going to be required to do in order to hit those standards. So what we're looking for in a feasibility study, we're looking for that WUFI Passive House report that shows preliminary annual energy usage. We're looking for some of the outputs from the WUFI model, which is what you see in that bottom left corner. You know, that's sort of what that WUFI model will look like. And then we're looking for target building envelope specs, showing that the building meets, you know, current FIAS Plus standards. In terms of how to get that incentive reimbursement, it's super easy. All we're looking for on our end is the feasibility study report and an invoice from the Passive House consultant. This is another really important piece, and I don't know if anyone from Stephen Winter is on the call, but I do have to give a huge kudos to Stephen Winter on this, because they were one of the organizations that really helped me design these different modeling incentives and really help conceptualize some of these things. So what we're doing is we're offering a $500 per unit incentive for projects that are able to get us preliminary models before the 90% design drawing set. So we're capping that at $30,000 per project, but at $30,000, it's pretty lucrative for a large scale multifamily project. That's a pretty lucrative incentive, and it'll cover a pretty significant cost. So we're capping it at 75% of the total costs of those preliminary models. And for projects that come in after 90% design, we cut that to 50%. So we cut everything in half, basically, for projects that come in after 90% design. Really what we're trying to do is the goal here is to try to influence these projects before 90%, because after that point, it becomes progressively harder to influence projects and try to layer on Passive House. I'm sure most of you that have worked on Passive House projects understand that. It's really, really difficult to try to build a Passive House if you're not designing it and baking it in very early on in your drawings. So much to the point that we're actually not offering modeling incentives after a 50% CD set, and that, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. After 50% construction, if it hasn't been baked in yet, it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get to those standards. And finally, I mentioned this earlier. We've really upped our game and got really aggressive on certification incentives. So we're offering up to 100% of the certification costs for Passive House projects. It's a max of $1,500 per unit, capped at $60,000 per project. Certification can be either FIAS, PHI, or ENERFIT. I would also throw in there that I would even consider, if somebody's going through and trying to get Living Building Challenge certification, full-scale Living Building Challenge certification, I don't know that I would offer it for any of the particular pedals. Maybe, if they were just getting the energy pedal for Living Building Challenge, I would consider it. I would, come up with some kind of a custom incentive for that. But I would consider Living Building Challenge as an alternative as well, just because of how impactful that certification offering is. So with all of these different incentives in mind, with modeling, with design, with feasibility, with certification, these are they're really aggressive. They're more aggressive than I think we've ever been on a particular building standard ever. And these aren't your basic utility incentives anymore. This is really meant to not only be not only cover the incremental cost of getting to Passive House, but also offering a carrot to doing it, to really, really aggressively pursuing it. And I think I sort of promised this earlier on. One of the things that we're looking at, as we progress into the future here, there's been a lot of talk about strategic electrification and around all-electric buildings. So we have come up with an all-electric building standard. I think most of you are familiar with it. If you're not, I can send out what that standard looks like. It is a little bit different from Passive House. However, I think Passive House and the standards that we've designed for all electric buildings, really, there's a great synergy there. And really what we're trying to do with this all electric building standard, you got one shot at doing it right with new construction. These buildings are going to be around for decades, if not centuries. And so what we're trying to do early on and often is trying to figure out ways to sort of strategically electrify these buildings. So at a point in the future when our grid is it has a lot more renewable capacity on it, we're driving really deep decarbonization of our built environment, and greater energy savings through high performance building envelope and heat pumps. Anyone, I tell people this all the time, anyone can build a zero energy building with enough PV, but really the intent of these standards is to focus on the energy efficiency piece. So really high performance building envelope, high efficiency ventilation systems, good heat pump technologies. And so how do we do that, right? So I think, this is sort of where we set the bar for our all electric buildings. And again, I think you look at this and you start to see, well, this is really where that synergy with Passive House happens. With Passive House, you're already at least 30% better than code. Your design loads, your heating and cooling design loads in these buildings is so small that, one of the only systems out there that's able to meet those loads is an air source heat pump or a ductless heat pump. Heat pump water heaters, this has been sort of a really, really difficult component to tackle. We've recognized that heat pump water heaters don't always work in multifamily applications. So we're easing our restrictions on domestic hot water in multifamily. Although I don't love the idea of electric storage water heaters, if it's necessary, as long as they are, quote unquote, relatively high efficiency electric storage water heaters with good distribution efficiencies, I've been I've been allowing those under these standards. WaterSense certified domestic hot water fixtures, and again, we're focusing a little bit more there on distribution efficiencies, and then a high performance energy recovery ventilator. So most of what we're seeing is ERVs in that case, with certain levels of efficiency there. So this is sort of a real world project, and I'm hesitant to mention which project it is, but I think if you take a look at the picture, you'll figure it out. This is a project in Hartford, $21 million project budget. You got 60 dwelling units on average. The HERS index was about 37. And the makeup of these units, they were 80% affordable, 20% market rate. They were all electric and FIA certified. And so, in terms of incentive, in addition to the HERS incentive, which was about $150,000, this project also capped off the Passive House certification. It capped off the all electric bonus. It also got, the extra 25% on the affordable housing side. So the incentive on this one was about $314,000. Now you're looking, you're saying, well, $21 million project budget, $313,000 incentive. In terms of utility incentives, just on the efficiency side, I mean, that's an incredible offering. It might be a drop in the bucket in terms of the total project budget, but in terms of the incremental cost to build to this standard, I think $313,000 gets you a long way with that incremental cost. And like I said, these aren't your average utility incentives anymore. These are really designed to push project teams to a level, to a higher level than we've ever gotten to. And I think in a lot of ways we're starting to do that. So it'll be interesting to see. I think this was the first year that we rolled out these enhanced incentives. I'm really curious, and I'm really excited to see how they pan out. I'm really excited to hear feedback on how the incentives are influencing project design, project teams. And I'm always open to any comments that you guys might have on these incentives. How can we, what else can we be doing? I think at this point, if if I go back to my management team and ask them to give me any more money for incentives, they'll start to look the other way on me. But I think we've really pushed as far as we can to try to develop the best incentive offering that we can to really ride this passive house wave. So with that, I'm gonna just kind of leave my contact information here. I think most of you have it already. For those of you that don't know, there is we do have a dedicated passive house training website on Energize Connecticut. I would actually encourage you to go to Connecticut Passive House's website. They have a phenomenal page dedicated to the training offerings, to the incentive offerings that are being provided through this initiative. And like I said, if you want to shoot me an email at any time, I'm all ears. I'm always open to feedback. So by all means, reach out to me. But that is all I have for today, and happy to take any questions that you guys might have.
All right, terrific, Nick. Many thanks. Very interesting and kind of inspirational stuff in the directions that you're going. Speaking as somebody from New Jersey, we have a couple. I'm going to unmute everybody. Yeah, and ask you if you would to mute yourselves when you're not speaking, but everybody should be unmuted at this point, although I'm not showing it on my screen as that. Let me make sure I did it correctly. Unmute all participants. Yes. I'm not seeing it. Maybe Rudy, I'm not seeing them as unmuted, although I did unmute them all. Maybe you can unmute them. But in any event, we had a couple of questions asked earlier. And Mike, you will ask less than 60% rated output. I'm going to see if I can unmute Mike. No, for some reason it's not unmuting for me, Rudy. I don't know if you can do it at your end.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay, yeah, it's just not obeying me. And then we have a question from Seema in a second.
Sure.
Once I'm able to unmute you. So.
Hi, Dean. This is Mike.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, go ahead with your question.
Sure. It was just regarding the whether I understood the slide right, that we were looking for air source heat pumps that can provide less than 60% of the rated output at 17, or was it meant to be more than 60%?
Did I put a less than sign? Oh, good point, Mike. Yeah, I gotta turn that carrot around. It is meant to be greater than 60% of the rated output capacity at 17 degrees. Good find.
Okay, just wanting to make sure I understood. All right, thanks.
That's what the P2P network is for.
And just in addition to that too, Mike brings up a really good point there. This 60% rated output capacity at 17F. So AHRI actually rates I know most of you know this, but for those that don't, AHRI rates the output capacity at 17 degrees F. So it's really just a simple calculation. What's the total output capacity of the system? And then you look at AHRI and, you see what's that rated output capacity, that heating output capacity at 17F, and you do the calculation. It's pretty easy.
Okay, great. I see Seema has a question. It looks like you're muted yourself, Seema. If you can unmute, you should be able to talk. There you go. You see me, you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. And now it looks like you're muted again. It looks like you self-muted, Seema. You were open before. There you go. But I can't. Nick, can you hear her? I can't.
Mm-mm.
No. Okay. Well, I'll ask it. Well, getting SEMA up, we have a different question from Alicia that was in the question box. For FIAS, you have to apply to be accepted. Do you have any insight on what the qualifications are to be accepted? Does that make sense, Nick?
So I think, yeah, I think I know what Alicia's saying here. So with a FIAS project, and I have a couple of projects like this that are, you know, the project finishes up, the HERS rater's all done, you know, they send me in all the project stuff, and you know, there's sort of the delay on the FIAS side on getting the actual certification. There's two things that I think should be known there. One is that, you know, there's been some projects where, you know, if I trust the HERS rater, if I trust the passive house consultant on the project, if they come to me and they tell me, you know, this building passed the FIAS testing requirements with flying colors, at that point, I will provide the passive house incentive at the end of the project. But you know, if the project was borderline, or if it was close, and they're still waiting to sort of make any changes or alterations in order to hit those standards, I'm going to have to wait until that project actually tests and certifies to passive house standards. But again, you know, I think that's sort of on a case by case basis. Like I said, if the testing comes in off, you know, right away, and you know, they did an amazing job and it passes, you know, by all means, I'm totally okay with offering the incentive before the project gets its actual certification.
Great, okay. It looks like SEMA has come in under the question, under Q&A. Can you elaborate more on workforce training? I mean, incentives or training opportunities for GCs and subs. That might really help move our projects along. This is a conversation we've had many times in the peer-to-peer about where we get down to the level of the subs, making sure that they're not having to go in and check after the fact that they've done it incorrectly, but getting them trained up to do it better.
It's a phenomenal question. And really, you know, with those seminar style, those building training workshops that we did, that was really what those workshops were intended to do. You know, we see, I think we see all too often, you know, when we do these training, and I'm sure we've all seen it, you know, we do these training offerings, we see the same people show up at these trainings, you know, and huge credit to the architects out there. The architects I think the architects in this state are so, we have the best architects in the country in this state. You know, the level of, the levels that they go to train themselves and continue to educate themselves on these topics is incredible, and I think that's a big testament to AIA. But you know, for those subs, you know, how do we get those folks in the room, right? And how do we get those folks trained on these topics? Because it's extremely important. And I think that's a lot of the reason that we brought Stephen Winter into this picture. They have great relationships with their subs, with subs throughout the state. But you know, by all means, SEMA, if there are other subs that are working on CHAFA projects that you would like to see participate in these trainings and in these workshops, I am more than happy to be able to provide training to those folks. I think, you know, I'm only one person, you know, trying to get all the subs into the room is difficult. So I'm relying on other organizations to reach out to their subs and to tell them that these resources and these offerings, these training offerings are out there. So if we hit a critical number of subs that, you know, need to be trained, we'll put together a custom training and we'll deliver it to them. I think it's a great idea, and I think it's certainly something that's going to be needed.
Terrific. I know Sam has had his hand up, but Peter Harding is saying he can elaborate on this a little bit more. So Peter, can you
Oh, it's actually, I'm not sure why I'm under Peter, but that was from Nicole.
Oh,
I don't
Okay.
know. Well, I'm Peter today. Sorry, Peter.
Peter,
But
but that's
I wanted to elaborate on what Nick just said, just to and follow up on Seema's question. So we have a couple of projects that we have. The site super is the went through the passive house builders certification training, and it's really difficult because a lot of the subs there's a language barrier. So what we started doing was we started doing diagnostic like smoke tests to show the team where the leaks were, because they understood once they saw what we were looking for, because you can't see air, right? So we're trying to chase air, but unless you can show where that air is coming from and then try to mitigate it that way. So we did more of like visual, even though we had some of the guys on site. There was 2 on site that were trained in the passive house builders course. But it's still difficult because of the language barrier. So to do these diagnostic tests on site it was really valuable for us.
yeah, this is Dean. A follow-up question on that, back to you, Nicole. Is that kind of thing scalable? I mean, could you create some kind of handheld, thing on your phone or on their phone that shows you doing that? And do you think that would explain enough, or do they have to actually be there and watch you do it?
They actually, when they see us coming now, they choose to come, all the different trades. So we have plumbing coming, we have the electricians, we have the framers, because they're taking pride in their work now, right? So they always want to blame the other subs. So it's, so they're kind of, now it's kind of like this, it's not a game, but they're kind of like, well, it's probably the plumbers. But we go and we smoke. We continue to do these diagnostic tests, and we're showing that they're getting better and better and better at air sealing. And sometimes it's just the detail of the build itself with cantilevers and whatnot that aren't really that easy to get to passive house. It's just not conducive for passive house. But we also tested, on another project, we went, and this team was like, we've air sealed everything. It's, it is, the best that it's the best, it's going to be the best. And we smoked the building, and they were like, oh my gosh. So we didn't caulk there because we thought no air would escape because of X, Y, and Z. So again, it's based on each situation is just so unique that it's not like scalable like using a phone, if like you're asking. It's on, they actually have to be there because, well, maybe not, maybe I'm incorrect, but I do think it's better to be on site and to show, because they're understanding, and they actually start helping us when we do the testing.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Sam Manning has had a question for a while up. Sam, do you want to try and let me see. You're self-muted. If you unmute, we should be able to hear you. But if not, I can read the question. So Sam mentioned, you mentioned embodied carbon. How is the EE program trying to incorporate embodied carbon into the program?
It's difficult. I will say it's difficult. Our savings in the way our cost test structure works for efficiency measures is, at least in Connecticut, we use what's called a utility cost test, meaning, and it for good reason. Our funding comes from electric and natural gas ratepayers. Our goal is to deliver electric and natural gas savings for these projects. So
Gotcha. Okay. Let me look. Kathy Dorgan had something come in. Kathy, you're self-muted. If you unmute, we should be able to hear you if you want to elaborate.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying I was really impressed by what Nicole was saying about on-site training. I know that several folks are doing that, and I wonder if that might be one of our future peer-to-peer programs, about just more information about what people are doing, how it's working, what they're learning from it. I don't even know if now that we can actually go outside, that some of that might be able to be on site or whatever, but I just thought it was great and wanted to know more.
Yeah, this is Dean. I agree. That sparked my imagination too a little bit. You know, the idea would be if they're getting better and better, like Nicole was saying, then do you recognize them in some way? And could that be somehow tied to what Eversource is doing, and some, you know, you're working with the subs and recognizing them for reaching higher levels of performance. You know, it's possible. SEMA had a question about, will you consider offering an incentive for PH builder certification or something along those lines, which is sort of another aspect of the same tool. I know you were asking what else can you be doing, Nick, and maybe something at the level of recognition or certification of subs might be another thing that we could certainly talk about in the P2P.
It's a great idea, and I think, you know, to answer Seema's question there, you know, absolutely. You know, if somebody gets their FIAS builder credentials, I would certainly offer that that reimbursement would absolutely apply to them. It's not just for that reimbursement, isn't just for folks that go get their certified passive house consultant credentials. It's for anyone that gets any credential through FIAS or PHI. And I did want to throw, you know, one more thing out there, because I think I'd be remiss. You know, there's so many people that have influenced this and have been a part of designing these training and incentive offerings. But Kathy Dorgan has been incredibly instrumental in helping to put these together, and Nicole and Peter Harding and the folks at McGran, you know, and for this all electric building, you know, they were the catalyst that helped me build these specs. So did want to give them a big thank you.
Terrific. Yeah, that's our old P2P coming through. All right, SEMA, Kathy, Alicia just noted that she agrees with Kathy about the on-site demo. Let's see, anybody else with any final questions for Nick?
Hi, Alicia here. Nick, this was really, really great. Just so helpful to see it, you know, laid out the way that you did. And I particularly like the upfront slides when you talked about how this aligns with the state's policies and goals. I mean, I don't know, I'm inspired, but I'm always, when I know it, but I'm always more inspired when I see it. So, you know, thank you for including that piece. I just kind of have a curiosity question. I mean, this really rolled out, I guess, in the spring, and I'm curious, how is it going? You know, like, do you have more work than you can handle? You know, like what's been the uptake so far, and what do you think are the, you know, is critical to really getting the word out so that you know, more people know about these this amazing opportunity?
Yeah, you know, I think I think I always have more work than I can handle. But this year I actually have a really amazing co-op and intern from the University of Hartford. I don't even know if he's on, but if Jack Rose is on, thank you. And he's been extremely valuable in helping to plan some of the logistics around these passive house trainings. ICF has been incredible. They've handled a lot of this turnkey for me. Connecticut Passive House, they've been absolutely wonderful in helping with the marketing and outreach, and I have a great marketing and outreach team that does a great job there. So on the training side, that is a well-oiled machine at this point, and I see that machine sort of chugging along as long as we can. And so I think that piece for me has been really a breath of fresh air. A lot of the folks that I lean on there have been able to take a little bit of the weight off. On the incentive side, we did just roll out these incentives this year. And so I think it'll be, probably another year before we see real results as projects wrap up. But in terms of excitement, I think it's certainly generated a lot of excitement. The all-electric building specs, we actually rolled those out about 1.5 years ago. So before all of the passive house stuff, and we've had quite a few projects that have come in, quite a few projects from builders that I would have never expected to meet these specs. And that's not, that's by no means a detriment to their quality of building, but it's just, one of the things that we've been able to do, and one of the shifts that I'm starting to see now, is we're getting builders who have used the same heating and cooling technologies for 20 years, the same 2x4 construction with an inch of OSB, or they're really advancing to putting the zip, that 2-inch zip on the exterior, to changing up their window flanges, to using a 2x6 framing, and it showed, and I have a lot of builders that are now meeting those specs, where if they wanted to, they could probably certify to passive house. I think that's the next step, and that's one of the reasons for those really enhanced certification offerings, is because I have a lot of builders that can build to these specs now. It's just certification has always either been too expensive or something that they never look to pursue. And so I think $60,000, like I said, $60,000 can go a long way on those projects, and that's what I'm hoping to get.
Great. Okay. So I think that's it. I had one last comment. Speaking for all the architects in the P2P network, I say we couldn't agree with you more that Connecticut has the best architects as far as these types of programs go. So thanks for the shout out to all of us who are listening in. But in addition, a shout out back to you, Nick. Great presentation, a lot of interest from all the groups. I guess everybody can sort of raise their hand if they want to clap in the dashboard. Otherwise, you can hear my hand clapping anyway, that works. So
Thanks, Dean.
thank you very much. And it was really terrific. For the